Welcome back to the show, everybody. My name is Idrif. I'm your host today of the What's Good Dough podcast, and I have an amazing guest for you all. I have Peggy Paul Casella, who is an author, a recipe developer, tester, just an internet wizard of all sorts. You're going to learn so much today about how we can make your pizza presence a little bit more available online. Is that the right word? Peggy, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Great. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Before we get into it all, there's this one question that I always ask my guests. There's no right or wrong answer. What's good dough?
I thought long and hard about this. I really did. What I landed on is, to me, good dough is accessible dough. Good dough is dough you could make at home in your own kitchen easily and have it every Thursday night if you're me.
Thursday Night Pizza is the name of the blog. I cannot believe I omitted that in the intro, but let's talk about how you got into de-snobbifying pizza, I believe is your tagline. How did you get into that journey?
You know, it's a long and winding road. I am trained as a cookbook editor. I lived in New York for a while and then moved back to Philadelphia, where I'm from. And when I was dating my now husband, I was also working part-time at a farm stand selling local vegetables and fruits and cheeses and all that. And for Christmas one year, he bought me a really fancy food processor. You know, my first big, expensive piece of cooking equipment ever. And in the booklet that came with it was a recipe for pizza dough. So one week I brought home, and it was a Thursday, I brought home whatever was free from the farm stand, because at the time I was not earning a ton and kind of just making it work, figuring out how to be a freelance editor, a writer, and also kind of figure out what I was going to do for my own creative stuff. And I made my first pizza dough then. It was clunky and not great, but it worked. And it was great enough for us. And then I made it again the following week with whatever I took home from the farmer's market. And then the following week, you know, at some point, husband said to me, Peg, this is ridiculous that you are just doing this for us. You should be doing this. Like, this is fun. This is different. And it was fun to experiment with different flavors. And so that's how Thursday Night Pizza was born. And along the line, at the same time, I was also taking on more and more clients as a freelance cookbook editor and publishing consultant, helping chefs get their books from proposal to publication, and also doing my own writing. So pizza, I mean, this sounds so schmoopy, but pizza became this beautiful bridge between the recipes I was working on for the cookbooks. It was a great way to test different flavor combinations because, you know, a round of dough is a blank canvas. And if you're not sure, oh, does that kind of pepper really go well with that kind of cured meat? Test it on a pizza. And so I did a little of that. And then, you know, I did a series of, I called them pizza-fied classics, where I would take mac and cheese or bacon, egg, and cheese. I did French onion soup pizza. And I would take these recipes and turn them into pizza form. And it was super fun. And I don't know, it just felt like joy.
I relate to that. I mean, the key to my heart is through my stomach. And it seems like your husband was very proud of the work that you were doing, so much so that he encouraged you, like, yo, you got to do this. And in that, you found even more joy, not just feeding your husband, but also sharing the love for your curiosity on what foods mix and mingle. And where does that come from? Just because I feel like not everyone has that natural curiosity in them to try and experiment, right? I personally like to just make pepperoni pizzas. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with doing it, keeping it simple or keeping it complex. But how about you? Are you just a foodie cook at heart? Where does it come from?
I got into cooking really, really young. My mom was a huge cook, and I wouldn't say even that adventurous of one. She liked cooking from the garden, and we had a huge vegetable garden. And so she'd come in, and if there were tomatoes, we'd have a tomato-based dinner. If there was zucchini, you get the point. So I had a good, solid basis growing up. And then, I don't know, I'm a creative. I like making things, whether it's writing, whether it's photography, whether it is, I don't know, singing, anything. And once I got into cookbooks, which kind of happened in this weird accidental way, I just fell in love with recipes and with combining different flavors based on the season, based on whatever I feel like, based on what's available in my refrigerator at the moment. I don't know. It's just such a wonderful world to me.
Do you draw a lot of your inspiration from the books that you're editing at the time? Maybe do you think, maybe I should create a blog post based off of this one recipe I'm editing and make it into a pizza or something?
Totally.
Yeah.
1,000%. It's so fun. Like every job, I should say, it's not always fun.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
There are the doozies out there. But I think, yes, overall, I have a blast looking at the recipes I'm working with and thinking, ooh, that was such a smart idea to put this with this. I'm going to pizzafy that. I'm going to
pizzafy that. I like that. Maybe give us an example of maybe one of your best creations on the blog of something that you created that you took inspiration from. I think some pizzas are more popular than others when it comes to just reach and views and engagement and like what the audience is looking for. So maybe talk about those two pizzas, and maybe they're the same pizza. Talk about some of your more, I guess, the pizzas that you're most proud of.
I have a very soft place in my heart for my French onion soup pizza, which I think I retitled on the blog to like boozy onion pizza or something. I'll find it. I developed that recipe after I had made, I think it was Julia Child's recipe for French onion soup. And I was just starting the blog at the time. I was getting a few jobs teaching pizza making in Philadelphia and a few other places. And that was the one that I would make the most frequently because it was fun. And who doesn't love caramelized onions? And who doesn't love French onion soup? And when you think about it logically, French onion soup is like the perfect pizza because what is it made of, right? Caramelized onions, a boozy, saucy thing, which is basically just cooked down soup, right? And then the croutons. So you're basically just flipping it on its head. The dough becomes, or the crust becomes the croutons. And then you pile the onions and the Gruyere on top. And it's just wonderful. And it's just so simple in a way, but sounds so complicated. And I just keep going back to that one. I don't know, it reminds me of my journey too and how I fell in love with pizza.
Nice. Are you looking to make the most delicious pizza? Well, listen up because I have an important message for you. A lot of pizza makers are using the wrong type of olive oil for their dough. Let me explain. Using commodity olive oil can have a detriment to your pizza, and I'm talking about a huge one. Whether it's rancidity or a nasty smell, you don't want that on your masterpiece. Say goodbye to commodity oil and say hello to Cordo olive oil. Cordo olive oil is the ultimate choice for pizza makers like us. Why? Because they use quality olives, they harvest it at their peak, and they store it securely so that when you purchase the olive oil, it is fresh. Cordo olive oil is the ultimate choice for pizza makers like us because they pick their olives at their peak, they harvest it, and they secure it in a safe way. That way, it's ready for you when you make your purchase. The choice is yours. Do you want an explosion of flavor, or do you want that nasty, bitter taste on top of your pizza or in your dough? Anytime you need some Cordo olive oil, use the link in the show notes or DM me and I'll send you that link personally. I appreciate you for supporting me and my show sponsors. Now, you mentioned recipe development, and I think that's one of the topics that I want to hit on. We're going to talk about SEO later, which I think is helpful for any business owner, pizza maker, anyone who's trying to get their name out there in the pizza world, because you got to be known. But also, if you are in the business of putting pizza out, I think having a solid recipe, one that is repeatable, one that is scalable, one that is easy to follow is a key for success. And I imagine you're not just saying, let's take this French onion soup recipe from Julia Child's, make it one time, and then post it on the blog. Is that what you're doing?
No.
Tell me about your process.
It really differs recipe by recipe. I think now that I've gotten so far down the road, I started my blog in 2014 and I've been editing cookbooks since 2008. So I've been in this game long enough that now when I develop a recipe, it's much quicker because I already know so much. You know, it's easy for me to just go back into, I joke that when I'm going through my memory or my, experience. I'm flipping through a file folder of data, So I go back and I'm standing in the kitchen and I'm thinking, okay, I want to make, I don't know, a like grilled tomato sauce for pizza. How would I do that? How many tomatoes do I need, right? Well, now, because I have all this experience, I could pretty reliably know how many tomatoes I need to make this amount of sauce. So I don't have to do that testing anymore in such a strategic way. But man, when I was starting out, the kitchen was a mess. I didn't have a dishwasher. I still don't have a dishwasher. It just wasn't, nothing was pretty about this. Nothing, except for the end photos, which back then, my photography skills were horrible too. So it was just content, which we can talk about later with the SEO stuff. But when I started this, I knew nothing and I wasn't doing it right, but I just kept putting up good content. I was dead set on the content I put up. It just had to be high quality. It had to be the same quality as a cookbook that was going to be published by Random House. And if it wasn't, I didn't post it. Or I would probably say something in the blog post like, hey, take this with a grain of salt, So yeah, the process, it's hard to explain specifically. It's more that, I would test it. If it was the sauce, I would mix 3 different bowls using like a little bit different salt, a little different pepper, this, that, the other. Same with the pizzas. There were a lot of failed pizza attempts. A lot of pizzas end up on the floor in the bottom of my oven when I was first learning how to use a pizza peel.
It's funny that you have a mess of a kitchen when you were just starting off, because I feel like that's I definitely relate to that. Like on pizza day, it's like, oh my goodness, how come I'm not cleaning up after myself? I've learned to get better at that over time, of course. I think my question for you about the whole recipe developing thing, and what a great insight you said earlier about just posting the best stuff, because that was your ideal vision of what you wanted it to look like. How do you make sure that the end user who is reading this recipe, I'm thinking from a business owner's perspective, like if I write a recipe down for my staff person and my goal is to remove myself from the kitchen and say, hey, this is the training, follow this recipe and keep it going. How do you make sure that the person who's reading the recipe really understands it and gets it down?
So when I'm working with clients, this is also more of a question for that. For instance, I'm working with a client right now on her cookbook, and I helped her work through the development process. So she's in the kitchen cooking the recipes, and I'm at the computer typing them as she's making them, making sure that, as I always say, Aunt Belinda in Montana, who doesn't cook that much, but might grab her old Fanny Farmer cookbook and make, her grandmom's mac and cheese recipe. If she picked up that book, she would be able to make that recipe. And so our running joke is that now this client calls me Aunt Peggy because that's what I'm always saying.
That's funny.
I'm like, right for Aunt Melinda. But I think that's the thing. And some people misconstrue that concept as writing for the lowest denominator. But I don't mean it that way. I mean it that no one needs to be an expert at everything. And if a home cook or a chef, an up-and-coming chef in a restaurant, or whoever you are giving that recipe to, it's only fair to give them a chance to understand it in the most specific language possible, and not just assume that they're going to know what you're talking about, because that's a fault on you, not a fault on them.
Yeah. There's this Reddit subreddit that I used to follow called Eli5. It's basically like, explain like I'm 5 years old. And it's not to dumb down the content, but it's really to encourage people like that you can take the most abstract thing and really boil it down so that anyone can understand it. And I think there's a talent, or there's a skill to that. There's some level of artistic requirement in order to really know the core, the foundational basics that people need to know to understand, and to be able to write it and communicate that. That's really cool.
This is so what has kept me in cookbooks all these years, because if you can't tell, I'm a big idealist and I love people and I love creativity, but I've also found as a cookbook editor, it's kind of like being the behind the scenes superhero who can take what a chef knows out of their brain and translate it into language that will really be usable to the reader, to the home cook, to the, whoever is getting that recipe. And I just think that's a beautiful process because, like I said, not every recipe reader needs to be an expert, but also not every chef needs to be an expert in writing. Why should they be, And
that's why
I love what I do, because I get to make it possible for some chefs who, some of the chefs I've worked for, English is not their first language. And so it's a lot of translation of like, okay, I know what you mean because I've been at this long enough, but you're not saying it the right way. Let's work on that. Let's get to a place where like really that home cook in Montana or wherever, no offense to Montana, by the way, I don't know why I keep saying that, but I just mean, someone who's just like not necessarily an expert in a certain cuisine or a certain whatever, a normal human being, right, should be able to make that dish as well as the chef is making it in their restaurant.
So simplicity, right, as foundationally basic as possible. How do you serve both audiences in a recipe when you're writing it? Someone who spends no time in the kitchen versus someone who is a professional chef who also picked up that book. How do you make that person, that buyer, that consumer, that reader, how do they feel like they're not reading something too elementary? Or does it even matter?
It doesn't matter. I think that if you read an article in, a well-researched blog or a news website that you trust, if you read the language, a lot of times it's not fancy. They're not using fancy adjectives and all these. They're writing straightforward. And there's nothing uneducated or lowbrow about that. If anything, my view is that that's higher brow. Because what you're doing is you're evening the playing field and you're not snobbifying, not to like keep going back to that, but that's why I love that word, because that non-word, I should say it's not a word, says the editor.
Says the editor. I love that.
Yeah. I think the key to good communication in general is clarity. And I think a lot of times fancy chefs, they overdo it on the fancy side, and then it's uncookable because no one understands what they're saying, not even the fancy people.
I love how you explained it. Leveling the playing field. That's beautiful. Making recipes, information, access to new skills accessible, basically.
Yeah, and it's food. We're eating here, people, and in this case, pizza. Come on. Since I started the blog, I've had a lot of funny comments on my recipes, as you can imagine. And there have been, I remember a few of my dough recipes because I put up, that's a key. A lot of the readers want all the different doughs, all of them. And you know how many there are. They're everything. And so I try and give everybody what they want, but do it in an easy way. So, my Neapolitan dough is a pretty traditional Neapolitan dough, but I use bread flour. And I got a few comments when I first had posted that saying, how dare you, like in these words, how dare you post something called a Neapolitan dough without Italian 00 flour? And I'm like, people, really? It's pizza.
Chill.
Yeah, you got to relax. Try the recipe first, then tell me if you're unhappy. Then that's a different conversation. But that just goes to the de-snobbify thing that I think, it's food. We're all nourishing each other. If you love pizza, loosen up and enjoy it.
Are you looking to level up your pizza game? If so, I highly suggest that you check out Ooni, the unrivaled leader when it comes to pizza ovens. Ooni pizza ovens are a total game changer. With the ability to reach up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, you'll have the power to be able to make the pizza of your dreams. What I love about Ooni is their portability and versatility. You can bring them anywhere, or you can keep them on your patio or in your backyard. And you can make a ton of different styles of pizza with it. They're so fun to use. And guess what? You can use them to start your pizza business too. So whether you're a passionate home pizza baker or a budding entrepreneur, you gotta get with Ooni. Use the affiliate link in the show notes. That way, you can let my sponsors know that you heard about them through What's Good Dough. Thank you for supporting me and my sponsors. As an editor, you are reviewing recipes, you're even posting recipes online, but you're also an author. Can we touch on your book as well? I don't even think we've talked about it yet. Oh, right there. Look at that.
I'm
Ninja
trying
Turtles?
to market myself better, okay? Because
There it is.
I've had other little interviews here and there, and I'll like forget to even say that I've done that, or and anyway, it's just
We should talk about it, and yeah, you should market it. You should be proud. It looks very inviting. De-snobbified for sure. Tell us about it.
It's called the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Pizza Cookbook. And so this kind of fell on my lap. I had started Thursday Night Pizza back in 2014. This was published in 2017. So the blog was pretty new. But what I found is that I was one of the very few people doing an entire blog based on just pizza. And because of that, the turtles found me.
What?
Yeah. And so
Leonardo actually DM'd you on Instagram?
I joke that they showed up at my door and asked me to do their cookbook. It wasn't quite as glamorous as that. But yeah, my agent reached out to me one day, and I was just starting this journey back then. I knew I was into it. I knew that it was going to become something because of the passion inside. But would I have ever guessed that I would be writing the official Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Pizza Cookbook? No, not in a million years. I remember running upstairs to my husband, who was working at home from at the time, and being like, this happened. I don't know where it came from, but the universe has just landed this on my lap. So they approached me and said, Nickelodeon wanted to make an official book, specifically pizza recipes. So they asked me for all of it. I developed the recipe list. I watched a lot of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles to pick out all the specific references to specific pizza recipes, and then, allusions to pizza ideas and all that. It was super fun. This was not grueling research. And then I created a recipe list and tested every recipe until it was just right. And it just came together. I got to work with my friend Albert Yee, who is the photographer. He shot magically. I think I was pregnant at the time too. It was like a whole mess of a time. And he shot in my sweltering hot kitchen in August somehow all of these pizzas, and look at this. He somehow was able to shoot some really good shots.
Wow.
Where's my
That's clean.
I know, but if you saw where we were shooting this, you wouldn't believe it. It was one of those, wow, I can't believe how well that came together things. And then when it was published, I really didn't know what to expect at the time. Yeah, I was just kind of curious. Okay, is this going to help my career? What is this going to do? It didn't really drive as much traffic to my website as I would have expected. But if you look on Amazon, it is one of the biggest accomplishments I've had, because not from the money I've made from it, not from the traffic it drove to my website, or even notoriety, but just the fact that I was able to take something that seems like a gimmick and turn it into something that people really use. And I've gotten so many comments on the Amazon reviews. You can see how a lot of people were right. I bought this as a gift for my friend, and then I was reading the recipes, and now the weeknight dough is my go-to, and I use this all the time. Because I've got the basic pizza ingredients in there. I have regular pizza dough, regular pizza sauce, a pesto. And so it also kind of just encourages people to make pizza, which is awesome.
I want to say congratulations. That is a great way of measuring success, for people to just say, I appreciate your work and I reference it and I listen to it. I feel the same way, because when people reach out and say, thank you so much for the podcast, it gave me this little bit of insight. I understand how much that fuels me. So I imagine it fuels you in a similar way. As we're discussing, recipe testing and recipe development, you've been on both sides. You've been the editor and you've been the writer. When you started this blog in 2014, social media wasn't at its, current height, right? I feel like social media is everywhere. And a lot of the people listening to this, they're on social media and they're probably developing recipes for themselves to give and share that joy of food with their followers or their listeners or their readers. Maybe you can talk about the one mistake to avoid as someone who is very experienced in this space.
I think what I have found the most within blogging and social media combined, because they're very connected to me, is that when you stray away from what comes authentically to you, it's not going to hit.
If you're inauthentic, it doesn't hit. Can you give us a more concrete example?
So, for instance, like you said, I've been at this for a while, and so I have fought the fight. I have done the research. When I started the blog and social media became much more influential in how blogs succeeded, I really dove deep and I read everything and I did the stuff and I followed the rules, and I'm such a good little rule follower. I really tried, and I found that nothing I did that felt weird to do ever succeeded. And in my head, I just kept fighting and I kept getting frustrated. Okay, why is this not translating to more views? Why is this not doing that? And then I found that the times when I just loosened up and did what I wanted to do. I found lately, for instance, I've been doing this series of Thursday pizza videos on my Instagram. I tried everything else. I tried, maybe not everything else, but I tried doing, I don't know, more like gimmicky things that were more on trend, and they just never felt right. And so I looked stiff doing it. And when that happens, no one really wants to watch you humiliate yourself. Like no one wants to see you try and be someone else. There are other people who will do that and they'll be great. Good for them. And I am so impressed. But for me, I like doing it my way. And I found that that's how it succeeds. Like these videos where I just do a top-down video of me making a pizza. Sometimes it's a complex one. Sometimes it's just a simple thing. Sometimes it's just a pepperoni pizza. But people love it. And I think to myself, why did I work so hard trying to conform to all these trends that social media gods were telling me I had to do, when all along I could have just been doing this and enjoying it, having fun, putting a funny, a fun music thing to it. And so I think that's the key to me. The biggest mistake that you can make is that you try and fit yourself into a box you don't belong in. And so what? If you read the internet too much, you will start to believe that there's only one way to do social media, and that is not true. And I think if you have good content, and you are actually solving a reader's or viewer's problem, then at some point you will get attention for it if you're doing it well. If it's high quality, if the lighting is right, if, you're using hashtags correctly, all those things. But yeah, I don't know. Does that help? Does that answer anything?
100%. I think it's so easy to look up all of the strategies, what's worked and what didn't. But we have to remember that what worked for Mr. Beast, if anyone knows who he is on YouTube, the people who are those originators, if we just replicate them, we're not going to be the creator. We're just replicators. And if it doesn't feel right to you, it's going to show, as you're saying. What I'm encouraging folks to do is just find your original voice and try to make that a thing, and take Peggy's words of wisdom there too and make it great content, right? Your audience will find you. How's it going, Pizza Pal? I just want to let everyone know that I started an email list. Why? Because I recognize that time is more important than ever, especially after being a dad. And I realize that content is abundant, and sometimes we just can't get to listening to a podcast. And so what I want to do is send out a weekly newsletter highlighting some of the key topics that we discussed in the podcast. I hope to save you a bunch of time, so please do sign up for this email list. There's going to be a link in the show notes. I truly appreciate it, and I hope I can save you some time. So thank you in advance for signing up for that email newsletter. That's going to wrap up part 1, y'all. In part 2, we're going to talk a little bit about SEO. And I think it's going to be helpful for a lot of people who are listening to this, who are trying to grow their reach when it comes to their restaurant, their blog, maybe even their YouTube channel. So make sure you check out that episode, all right?